Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today we are continuing with our British soap making theme, and we are making tea time. There's nothing I like better than a nice cup of tea first thing in the morning. So I am making this soap based on the Nutty Bee, which is one of my goat milk soaps, and it's made with goat milk powder because that's what was required for the assessment, and honey from my honeybees. So I've added my lye water solution into my oils, and both are at about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I've split off a small amount that is equal to the weight of the embeds because I did start off with a full batch, and I will use that to make separate embeds for another soap another time. The remaining soap that I have left I'm splitting into 3 even sections. The design I have in mind is easily dividable into thirds, more or less. I'm adding my goat milk powder into each section of my soap batter, and then I'm going to go ahead and mix that with my spoon. I am going to divide my honey up at this stage as well and just add that in so that everything is evenly distributed and I don't forget to add anything in. This honey is from my honeybees. We have 2 hives at the moment which produce enough honey to keep us in honey and my soap and skincare products in honey. So my honey is found in some of my soaps and a few of my products as well. Honey is great for the skin, it's a natural humectant. Alright, so all of my honey has been added into my soap batter now. The first section I'm going to be working with is actually a little bit over a third because I need to save some of it for later, but I need to use all of my colorant now. So I'm going to put that into a larger separate bowl, and I'm going to add about a third of one of my other sections of soap into it. Once I've got that all in the bowl, I'm going to mix it together with my spatula. I am going to need to come back to this at another time, so I need to keep this batter as fluid as I can. So I'm going to keep mixing it to get rid of those goat milk lumps, and then I'm going to go ahead and add some turmeric into this. Again, I'm mixing that with my spatula so that this batter stays as fluid as possible. I'm going to disperse my colorant and my goat milk as thoroughly as I can with my spatula. I will use my stick blender now just to get out any of the last bits of lumps in there. But I'm just going to stick blend as minimally as I can so that I don't speed up trace too much. I'm going to pour about 1/4 of this off into one of my containers here so that I can save that for later. And then I'm going to stick blend what is left in my large container to bring it to a medium to thick trace. This soap does involve a lot of sculpted layers, and this first layer is going to be sculpted. So the more stick blending I can do at this time, the quicker my soap is going to move. I'm going to stir that with my spatula to get rid of any air bubbles that I have in there. And then I'm going to pour this soap into my 2 molds. I'm going to divide it out as evenly as I can between these molds. And then I'm going to leave it to set up for a little while. Alright, my soap has set up, and I'm going to place my embeds into this first layer. These are little stars that I've created, and these are going to form a decoration in the mug. And the pattern doesn't need to be precise, it is just going to be a random pattern of stars on the mug. I'm placing the first line down, and then I'm going to poke those right to the bottom of the mold using the tip of my knife so that they don't move around too much. I am going to use a second layer of embed, so that will move this first layer around a little bit more and give it a more random pattern. Now I've got that first layer in, I'm going in with my second layer, and I'm going to place those in between the first layer embed so that they don't stack right on top of each other. I'm going to place those right on top of the soap again, and then I'm going to poke them in, not right to the bottom but about halfway down with the tip of my knife. I've got all of those embeds in, and the rest of the orange soap that I didn't pour into my mold I'm just adding right on top of this layer to completely cover it and make sure there are no air gaps in those stars. Now that I've got all my soap in, I have let it set up a little bit so that it can hold its shape. and I have a scraper that I just cut out of corrugated plastic, and I'm using that to form the cup shape of this first layer. Some of the soap is coming back out, and that's just fine because I can use it later in the soap. So I'm running my scraper along the soap and removing any excess that I need to, and forming a nice smooth cup. Alright, the next stage for this soap is I'm going to add an activated charcoal line, which will really define the edge of the cup against the tea that will be in it. I've added the activated charcoal into this tea strainer, and I'm just sprinkling it over the top of my soap. This was a little tricky for me. I have to work with a set amount of activated charcoal. Normally I'm not restricted at all, so I needed to make sure I got it as evenly between the two loaves as I could, so I just did a little bit at a time. I'm working with my second section of soap, and this is the bit that I have taken some out of already. I'm separating out a small amount of the soap into a separate container, and this is the container that had my goat milk in previously, so all of that goat milk powder will be fully incorporated into my soap. I'm adding a little bit more of my turmeric in here and dispersing that by using my stick blender as a spoon. I am going to use my stick blender now to thicken the trace on this and disperse all of the goat milk powder. So the turmeric doesn't make this a particularly realistic tea colour, so I'm adding a little bit of activated charcoal to make this orange into brown, and it's a beautiful rich tea colour. I'm going to add a little bit more so I have a deeper tea colour, and then I'm going to pour the white section into the brown, and I have added some kaolin clay into this white section. I'm working back with my moulds, and I'm using my spatula to break the fall of this layer so it doesn't break through into the previous layer. Now my white was a lot thinner than my brown, so it is coming out first, so I've poured a stripe of that down my first mould and then a stripe of it into my second to evenly distribute that between the two moulds. And then I'm going to scrape the rest of my soap out into my containers. I'm using my spatula here to start to shape the soap and create the dome, and that's going to make it easier for me to scrape the soap later, and it's putting the soap where it needs to be. It's also giving me a good idea of whether the soap is even in the two moulds or if I need to adjust that slightly at this point. I'm pretty happy with the distribution. So I let my soap set up, and once it was a firm enough consistency I used my scraper again, and I'm creating a dome shape for the top of the tea. Now I do normally like to make my scrapers on my 3D printer, but those usually take about 3 hours or so to print, and I didn't have time to do that this week. And I also wanted to show you that you can make the scrapers out of anything that you've got lying around. You don't need fancy equipment or 3D printers. This is just corrugated plastic that I used a pair of scissors to cut into a dome shape. I'm going to keep scraping my soap until I'm happy with the dome that I've got. Alright, there we go. Just one last final pass and we're on to the next orange layer. I'm just pouring this right on top of the brown layer. So this orange layer is going to form the top of my mug. So it needs some more of those little star-shaped embeds to match the bottom. So I'm going to place about 6 of those in each of my molds, and I'm just placing them right on top and pushing them into the orange layer. But I'm trying to make sure I don't break through into the brown layer. I'm going to put 3 in each side, but I am leaving a gap right in the middle for the next stage of this soap. Once I got all of those embeds in, I used the same scraper that I used on the tea layer on the top of this cup layer, so that dome is going to match the tea exactly and be a more realistic teacup. Now scraping this soap is moving the embeds slightly, which is just fine because I want a random pattern as long as I have that gap in the middle, but it's also pushing that soap right into any of the little gaps in the stars so I don't end up with any air gaps in the soap at all. It's time to add another activated charcoal layer, and this is the last activated charcoal layer and the last of my activated charcoal. So all of that is in my tea strainer and I am putting that right on top of this soap. Here we go, this is the next stage, and this embed I made out of soap dough with some white and some orange, and this is just an elongated teardrop shape, and I've kept it deliberately rough around the edges to make it look like a milk pour. When I drink tea, I like a nice cup of tea in the mornings, as I said, and I put milk in it. It's nothing better than tea with milk in my opinion. So the final step of this soap is working with the rest of that soap batter, and I've just coloured that with the rest of my kaolin clay, and I'm using my spatula to break the fall of that and putting that into my moulds as evenly as possible. I let that set up for about 10 to 15 minutes, and I'm using the back of my spoon to texture the top. You can see that my milk embed is sticking up from the top a little bit, and the top of the texturing is actually going to reach the top of that nicely. So when I put the next little embeds right on top, they're going to flow perfectly. Alright, here are those little embeds. Look how cute those little milk jugs are with the milk coming out of them. I would have loved to have stood these up so that they were attached by the milk drop, and that would have looked adorable, but in the long run when I transported them to farmers markets or shipped them out to anyone who buys them, they just wouldn't have stood up. They would have ended up snapping off, which wouldn't have been great. So here is a close-up look of the finished bar. I'm going to leave this for about 12 to 14 hours and come back tomorrow and cut this soap. Alright folks, it is the next day and I am nervous about cutting this one. I have been super nervous about cutting this whole series so far. But let's have a look at the inside of this loaf and see how it turned out. Alright, so that's pretty cute. I love the way the little stars are lined up along the bottom. It's a nice random pattern with the mug. And you can just about see in the pot swirl with the cream in the cup of tea. And that milk drop right into the middle looks so cute. And of course, those little milk jugs right on top, they are adorable and they line up so nicely with the milk jug in top. Look how cute they are all lined up there. Alright, I'm going to leave you now with some pictures of the finished bars, and here they are. I just love the little cup of tea right there and the milk jugs right on top, pouring the cream into the tea. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next Tuesday.